Finance Minister Tito Mboweni has tabled a massive 2.2 trillion rand budget for this year, but it's 300 billion rand less than last year's budget, which was tabled before the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. The tightening of the belt has been justified by government's need to reduce spending and rein in spiraling debt and stabilize public finances. So this while seeking to put the economy on a recovery path following a devastation, or rather the devastation by the coronavirus pandemic. So let's analyze this further. We're joined by Michelle Dickens, who is Chief Executive Officer at TP and Credit Bureau. Thank you so much for coming through, and your patience is appreciated. And Michelle, you know, one can think about striking a balancing act of having to prioritize of getting the economy back into action, but on the other hand, to vaccinate the nation so that there can be certainty as far as the well-being of the people is concerned.
Absolutely. I mean, ultimately, at the moment, we are spending more than we're collecting from less people. So when we look at the recent Stats SA data, we can see that at the peak of the pandemic last year, 2.2 million people lost their jobs. But with a small recovery by the end of the year, we're still sitting with 1.3 million jobs lost from the beginning of 2020 to the end of 2020. And what the finance minister did allude to was the fact that there's going to be 10 billion rand set aside over the next 2 years for the purchasing of vaccines in order to hopefully stimulate growth in the economy from a 7.2% contraction last year, with a forecast of a 3.3% growth this year.
Well, I mean, like, speaking about growth right now, it's something that is not of the immediate priority, because you cannot talk about growth when you cannot discuss the issue of recovery. And when we're looking at recovery, we're not looking at the macroeconomic basis of the country. We're looking at, the minute details of one individual business person whose factory was shut down and perhaps employing about 50 people, having to let them all go. So when they have to come back into business, I mean, like, how do you talk about a recovery in terms of being heavily indebted and then reaching that break even to pay back the debtors and now going forward to be profitable? So this recovery, I mean, like, this path, how do you see it being crafted by this budget?
So one of the reliefs that the minister spoke about was a relief on corporate income tax, which will be lowered from 28% to 27%, but only in April 2022. And the minister did allude to the fact that there would be, you wouldn't be able to deduct your interest deductions or your assessed loss deductions. So there is a benefit, but there will be some losses there incurred by businesses who did have assessed losses coming forward. Personal income tax brackets will be increased by 5%. So that's going to, it's higher than what inflation is. So that's going to benefit our lower and middle income households. And of course, VAT remains unchanged. The minister did say that they were starting a dedicated unit to investigate high net worth individuals, to go after those individuals with complex and offshore arrangements, hoping to recover some 3 billion rand from that project alone.
So when we have to bring this budget closer to home, we cannot speak over the heads of many South Africans who are at the receiving end of this COVID-19 and the lockdown levels. When people have been impoverished by the year 2020, as they are sitting back at home, is there hope for them to say they are not working at the moment and all they can hope for is just a 350 rand grant from government? I mean, like, it's so sometimes we speak about the dignity of people here who had to go to the UIF to get that money so that they can be able to survive. But with 2021 and going forward, is there hope for ordinary South Africans who are saying that I don't know what's next in line for me after I have received a jab of the vaccine?
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Look, when you look at the COVID distress grants, those have been extended to April. When you look at the social grants, those have been increased, but only by 2%. Ultimately, we've got 18.3 million social grant recipients. So we've got this escalating increased number of people on social grants, limiting what government can then increase per grant to 2%, not even the amount of inflation. And there has been job recovery, but it's not taking us back to where we started the year. So ultimately, we're ending the year with fewer jobs, fewer people that are employed, the highest unemployment rate on record at 32.5%. And more worrying, it's in the youth unemployment. When we look at youth unemployment, our youth between the age of 15 and 24 make up 26% of our working population. And employment in this category is only 7%. To put that in perspective, we've got 10.3 million youth that are in that working category of 15 to 24, and only 700,000 of those are working. So the government has applied 10 billion rand towards the youth employment project initiative. That takes it to a total of 100 billion that will have been spent, and yet we're still only sitting at 7% employment within that category of individual.
Well, when we're talking about the issue of employing people, one would also think about the model of recovery in as far as the clawback strategy that the government can employ. When you look at the private sector, are we talking about economic recovery, but not talking about the businesses that had to shut down? Because, I mean, like the backbone of South African economy is dependent on rather the engine of small businesses. So when we talk about people who have to wake up every day earning, the entry-level salaries, millions of people are now sitting at home and not working. So when we're talking about youth employment, what about adult employment?
Absolutely. So as we look at the numbers, we can see that our 40-year-olds are our most labor absorbed. So in our labor absorption numbers, in our 40-year-old categories of individuals have the highest employment rate. And even if we look at those numbers, our youth is growing faster. We've got a young age, and so our youth is growing faster than the employment that we can create for those younger category of people coming in. What government has allocated is 792 billion rand to infrastructure investment, particularly in the road infrastructure. And as we know, in construction, we've lost 177,000 jobs from the beginning of the year to the end of the year. So there has been some recovery there. And the minister did allude to the fact that there would be public-private partnerships. But he also alluded to the fact that the end user must pay for cost-reflective tariff for usage. So I'm not sure what that means, but more tax, I imagine.
Well, I mean, there's so much to talk about. I believe our conversation will only end here, but the issues will not. So shall we say we have an appointment for another day so that we can unpack the budget further?
Thank you very much. Enjoy it.
Right. Michelle Dickens is Chief Executive Officer at TP and Credit Bureau, unpacking the budget for us there. And of course, some of the issues that we have not touched on here, we will expatiate on them. I mean, we still have time in the subsequent days and programs that will follow after here onwards. And of course, Michelle Dickens will be back with us in our next schedule to speak about the budget. On to other news now. Two people